night long, Weird Night on BBC Two.
This is Weird Night.
Hello, you're watching BBC Two.
Weird Night continues. In 5 minutes, weird thoughts. Reasonable people discuss the unreasonable. But first, when ordinary folk tell extraordinary tales, strange days.
One fine summer's evening, I was walking on the shores of Gerrans Bay with my brother, who's a high-flown scientist not given to flights of fancy, when he suddenly drew my attention to something in the water. "What on earth's that?" he cried. And to my astonishment, I saw an enormous sea creature, sea monster, just offshore about 300 meters from the shore, and we were looking down from a height at an oblique angle. And it had a long neck, an enormous hump, two smaller humps which were muscular, and you could see the muscles ripping as it was propelling itself rapidly along. And then we realized it had got a long tail which was just below the surface and which was as long as the trunk part. Now, surprisingly, the monster had this long neck and, for the size of the animal, a very small head. And in a way it looked rather endearing because it had got its head at a pert angle and its sort of nose in the air, and it was moving very rapidly and very smoothly. It was gliding very fast, and it was quite surprising, in view of the size of the animal, that it was making very little disturbance on the glassy, still surface of the water. We watched for about 5 minutes. Then all of a sudden it submerged. And it didn't, as one might expect, put its head down and take a dive. It just went down like a submarine. First of all, the hump disappeared, and there was the neck and the little head. And the last we saw of it was the little head and the nose disappearing below the surface of the water, with scarcely a ripple.
I am from Bala in North Wales, and there has been a lot of talk about sightings on the lake. People have seen peculiar things. But what I saw was, sitting in the office one morning having a cup of coffee, I looked out onto the lake and there was this massive thing swimming along the surface. It was at least 8 feet long, and it was making its way towards the bank. I went in the car and came over the fence down onto the lake foreshore, but it had disappeared. Sometime after that, I was out on the lake one day and I saw what turned out to be a dead sheep, a massive thing. I put a piece of rope round one of its legs, pulled it onto the foreshore, and then dragged it behind some trees and left it there. The following morning, I went with my staff to bury this sheep, and when we arrived at the spot, it was nowhere to be seen. And I often ask people, you tell me who goes round pinching dead sheep. As to where it could have gone will remain a mystery, but in my own mind, there was only one way it could have gone, and that would be back into the lake.
Weird.
BBC Two?
This is Weird Night.
BBC Two.
Weird.
Weird Night continues. At 9:15, the last American freak show. But first, ordinary people tell extraordinary tales. Strange days on Weird Night.
I was at home one day when the telephone suddenly rang. I picked it up and this voice in Italian said, "Pronto?" And I said, "Pronto?" And a little taken aback, the person said, "Excuse me, but is that the dry cleaners shop in Via Pezzana?" And when she spoke, I recognized that this was a woman who I had been very friendly with during the years that I'd lived in Rome, but we had subsequently fallen out and hadn't spoken or seen each other for many years. And I said, "Maura, is that you? It's me, Vida." And she said, "Vida? What on earth are you doing in the dry cleaners shop in Via Pezzana?" And I said, "Maura, I'm not in the dry cleaners shop in Via Pezzana. I'm in London, and you phoned my home in London." Well, she was absolutely staggered, as was I, because as she went on to explain, she had no idea that I was living in London at all, let alone did she know my phone number there. And she phoned the dry cleaners at least twice a week, so she was certainly sure of their number. Well, as you can imagine, we were both absolutely staggered by this extraordinary quirk of electronic fate. And we really believed that it was for some sort of purpose. And we thought that it probably meant that we would renew our friendship in a way that was deeper and more valuable, you know, than it had been before. But that didn't turn out like that. And in fact, we haven't spoken or seen each other in 4 years.
I'm a bookseller. I work in the book market on the South Bank in London under Waterloo Bridge, and I was setting out my stall one day. I had a big armful of books and I was setting them out one by one all along the table. And an old lady approached me and she came up to me and she said, you know, "What days are you here and how long's the book market been here, etc." And she was telling me how the area had changed since she last knew it. She'd got married after the war, she'd gone to Canada, and this was her first time back, and everything had changed. She thought it was amazing. And I was talking to her, and I was still laying out the books, and the one I laid out was called The Language of Flowers. And she looked at it, she says, "Oh, I had a copy of that when I was a little girl." She says, "I really loved it. It was a constant companion. I'd love to replace my copy. Looks very similar." And she picked it up and began to look through it, and I carried on just laying out the books while she did it. And when I finished, I looked back, and she was standing there with the book in her hand like this, and other hand on her mouth, and she was all sort of almost shaking, and something was wrong. And I went up to her, I says, "What's wrong, madam? What's the problem?" She said, This is my book." She says, "This is my actual book. Look, it's got my name in it, Hetty." But she says, "How did you get the book? Because we lost this book in the Blitz. Our house was completely bombed. All our belongings, we just left them because it was just a pile of rubble. We never took anything away. How on earth did you get this book? Because it is definitely mine. Here's it," you know. She showed me the little annotations, and we were talking about the book, and she showed me the little drawing of a bush or a tree or something, and she'd put it there in the back. So she said, "Oh, I've definitely got to have this book. I just can't believe it," she said. So she pulled out a purse and was going to pay me. I said, "Oh no, please." I said, "Look, honestly, I couldn't take that. Please accept it as a gift from a bookseller because it's a wonderful story."
I was playing George III in The Madness of George III by Alan Bennett at the Theatre Royal York about 5 months ago. In the play, George III is treated for his insanity by a doctor called Dr. Willis. Just before curtain's about to go up, I start to get these chest pains and have a lot of difficulty with my breathing. So the cry goes around the theatre, "Is there a doctor in the house?" Well, they managed to find one, get him up to the dressing room. He checks me out, pronounces me fighting fit, and I go on, give the performance, no problems. Later, I'm talking to this chap in the bar, ask him his name. He says, "My name's Willis, Dr. Willis." I think, hang on a minute, that's the name of the guy in the play. That's not all, he says. "I am actually the great-great-great-grandson of the original Dr. Willis who treated George III in 1788.
About 5 years ago, my mother moved to a new house in the country, and in the garden there was a barn which was going to be demolished, and it was full, the chap who used to live there was a builder, and the barn was full of bits of old wood and tools and lots of wood chippings on the floor, and we're basically having to clear the whole place out, burn it, and before it could be demolished. And the garden was a mess too. We had a big bonfire at the end of the garden, and I'd taken a barrow load of stuff, chippings from the floor. I'd taken it down to the bonfire at the end of the garden, tipped it on, and I was standing there about 2 yards away from the fire chatting, and there was this bang, and I felt something hit the side of my head, and I put my hand up, and I took my earring out of my ear, and there was this .22 bullet which had been on the fire and had exploded, and the cartridge embedded itself in my earring, and obviously if I hadn't been wearing the earrings it would have got me in the neck. And at the time what I was quite freaked out by was the fact that it has the letter E on the bottom of it, and my name's Elaine, and I thought this could have been quite literally the bullet with my name on it.
I was walking along the road in Folkestone where I live, and there was a phone box in the street ringing. I don't usually answer phone boxes obviously, but for some reason I decided to answer this one. Picked it up, and there was a voice at the other end, matter-of-factly saying, "Oh, sorry to bother you at home, Jason, but the fax machine's broken down. You know, can you help me fix it?" And it was Sue, who I work with at the AA in Dover. And I sort of stopped her in her tracks and said, "Sue, just a second, you rung me in a phone box, you know, how did you know I was here?" And she said, "Oh, stop messing around, Jason, look, we're really busy, how do you sort this machine out?" And I said, "Sue, look, I'm in a phone box, you know, how did you know I was here? You know, what are you doing?" And you know, she just wouldn't believe me, and I kept trying to convince her and gave up in the end. So I told her what to do with the fax machine, how to get it sorted out. And while I was telling her, she suddenly stopped me in my tracks and said, Jason, I haven't dialed your home phone number." She said, "You live in Folkestone, don't you?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I've dialed the Folkestone prefix, but I've dialed your staff payroll number. It's next to your name on the list at work." And sort of took all this in, and basically, you know, that's exactly what happened. She dialed my staff payroll number, and my staff payroll number just happened to be the exact same number of this phone box that I happened to be walking past.
I was on a train coming back from a day's shopping and looking forward very much to having a cigarette. I lit a cigarette, and just as I did so, in came a pile of Italian students who objected very strongly to the smoke and started to waft their arms about and cough. And they made me feel very uncomfortable. But anyway, I persisted with my cigarette and eventually suggested that perhaps they'd like to go into another compartment because I was within my rights sitting here in a smoker. They didn't and stayed with me all the way home. And I was having very unkind and unchristian thoughts about these yobbos. And when I got home, I thought, I'm so upset now, I'm probably not going to sleep. But I did. And shortly afterwards, I was awakened by flashing lights. I got up, pulled the curtains back, and found that the lights were coming from a fire engine. And the fire was in the house opposite. And I think it must have been at that moment that the fire brigade knocked at the door, and lo and behold, who should come out of this house but my students from the train. And I was very surprised, and I think at the same time slightly delighted that they too had been affected.
God, look, that's so weird. Weird, that is. Oh, genuinely weird. Have you seen this? Weird. Very, very weird. Look at it. Ooh. Oh, no, it's not so weird. Oh, you're right. It really is, isn't it? Oh, God.
Is there anyone out there?
This is Weird Night.
watching BBC Two.
Weird.
Weird Night continues. In 10 minutes, WSH, the disturbing world of the urban myth. But first, ordinary people tell extraordinary tales. Strange days.
Back in 1989, I was in training at the Hendon Police College, and I used to come home for the weekends. On the Thursday evening, I phoned my mother to let her know that I'll be coming home the weekend. And on the Friday evening, when I got to the Isle of Sheppey where I live, I went to the high street to get my music papers, which I collected each week, which also entailed me coming into my road from the opposite end, which I normally do. As I got about 3/4 of the way down the road, I passed a house where lived an elderly gent, Mr. Jenkins, whom I knew quite well, having lived in the road for 13 years. He was standing outside the front of the house, and I said, "Hello, Mr. Jenkins," as I passed him. And he raised his hands to the brim of his hat, nodded, but didn't say anything. Oh, strange. Anything. Anyway, carried on, got to my front door, got into my living room, and there's my mother. First thing she said to me was, "Guess who died last night?" "No, sorry." She said, "Mr. Jenkins." And I just stood there with my mouth open. I was totally shocked.
I remember I was climbing up Ben Nevis, going up the Glen, and I came to this ice bridge going across like this, and I could see it was terribly dangerous to actually go over the top. And when I arrived at the bridge, just where I needed it, suddenly, stretching out in front of me, there was a line of footsteps, 1, 2, 3, going ahead, and just at the side, as if there were a shepherd's crook, just going down at the side, imprinted in the snow. There was this line leading ahead, and the extraordinary thing was that before there was nothing, and as far as I could see, in front there was nothing. And I knew that if I put my feet in these prints, I'd be able to get over this ice bridge without any trouble at all, and I'd be perfectly safe. So I did that. I went forward, putting my feet carefully, rather like good King Wenceslas, in the snow prints, and arrived safely over the ice bridge. And I looked back, and to my amazement, there was nothing behind except this one line of prints. And in front of me, going down the slope to Kinloch Leven, there was absolutely a wide expanse of totally untrammeled, untouched snow. The prints started and stopped exactly where I needed them. And people have said, well, how did that happen? I've no idea, but I know they were there when I wanted them, and it could well be they saved my life. Really, one could say it was a miracle.
When I was 9, I was in my bedroom reading, and I was aware out of the corner of my eye that there was something that shouldn't be there. And as I looked up, there was this creature, which could only be described as a troll-like thing, sitting on the chair. And it was about 1 foot high, naked, really hairy, really ugly, and had no genitals or anything. And he said to me, "Whatever you want, I can get for you. Anything." I thought, oh. Now, when you're 8 or 9, there's not a real lot that you actually want. So I thought, oh, test it. So I asked this troll thing to get my mum to come in and to pick a particular cushion up. And there were quite a few. And I said, well, pick that one up and walk out with it. And a few minutes later, my mum came in, picked up this particular cushion, and was almost to the door with it. And I said, "Mum, what are you doing with that?" And her face sort of went, I don't know. I've come in for it for some reason. And she looked really confused. So anyway, she went out, and the troll reappeared, and I said, "See, whatever you want, I can get that for you, anything."
We were sitting in his kitchen having coffee on a perfectly ordinary evening, about 1 o'clock. And I had a very strong sensation that entity had come up to my eyes and was looking through them into the world. I didn't say anything to my friend and just carried on the conversation perfectly normally. And as one does in conversation, he glanced up at me and looked away, obviously distressed. I sat there for a moment and then asked him what was the problem. And he said, when I looked up at you, there was someone else sitting there. We sat for a moment and I said that I knew what he had experienced because it confirmed what my sensations were. He couldn't look at me again, and because of the sense of unreality that prevailed at that moment, we decided that it would be best if we just made physical contact by touching hands to regain some reality. And having done that, we then decided it was better to leave the house and return to our friends, where we spent the rest of the night quietly talking about ordinary things.
A friend of mine won a rather ghastly vase at some kind of evening do and brought it home for the general contempt of her family. I was staying at the house overnight at the time and I had the chance to see it. It was in the form of a small Grecian urn, and what was particularly disgusting about it was that it was varnished in a shiny black lacquer, and it had a sort of embossed body. Well, it was put up out of the way on top of a vestments cupboard in the dining room, and I stayed overnight in an adjoining room with the doorway which was open, and in the morning the vase had totally changed in its appearance. No one could have got in and taken it away and done anything to it, and instead of being shiny uniform black, it was as if it had been put on a potter's wheel and had emery paper applied to it as the wheel was turning, because the black lacquer had been worn down, exposing a green undercoat, and then the terracotta of the vase itself, so that the effect was immensely improved. It was as if it was antique and had been dug up somewhere, and it was quite pleasing to look at. But how that could possibly have happened in total silence, in the night, in an empty room, with someone sleeping immediately adjoining to it, I can't imagine.
I had a healing experience. I was lying propped up in bed, masses of pillows and tubes and drains coming from everywhere. And clouds rolled in at the bottom of my bed, and then they cleared. And as they cleared, I saw this Indian teepee, and in front of it was a fire made of sticks. It was burning, and there was a medicine man walking round, dancing round the fire, and he was singing a chant. He had a shaker in his hand and a hat on his head with two horns. And he told me to take the healing, to lie still, because I tried to sit up to see more. After all this had happened, it was like being in a white, bright bubble. It kind of came over all my bed, the Indian scene. And on the day afterwards, on the Friday, all the tubes, the drains, everything was taken out of me, which was early, because the surgeon had said the next 48 hours after the operation was crucial. And Mr. Maudsley, who was the surgeon, couldn't believe just how well I had done.